Everyone in the city knew about her. The moment she walked into a room, the air seemed to tighten. People instinctively lowered their gaze or stepped aside. The woman who was engaged to one of the most feared Korean mafia bosses carried herself with a quiet but deadly authority. She didn't need to shout or raise her hand. Her presence alone was enough to make even the boldest men and women feel small and careful. The newspapers avoided her name, the police treaded lightly, and her own staff spoke about her in hushed tones, as if saying her name out loud could summon her wrath. Inside the grand mansion she called home, the walls were as imposing as her reputation. Marble floors reflected the soft but intimidating light, and priceless paintings adorned every room. Security cameras monitored every corner, not just outside, but inside the house itself. She moved through the corridors with grace, her heels clicking softly but echoing like a warning. The staff knew better than to make mistakes. One wrong word, one careless glance, could earn someone a glare that would freeze them in their place for minutes on end. The staff whispered stories about her. They said she could spot lies from a mile away. They said she never forgot anyone's mistakes and held grudges longer than anyone could imagine. She was cold, meticulous, and almost inhuman in her precision. Yet there were times when she was unexpectedly fair, almost gentle, but only to those she deemed worthy. Most people never reached that level. She didn't smile much, and when she did, it was rare and fleeting, leaving a strange emptiness in the hearts of those who saw it. Her life wasn't easy, despite the wealth and power. The mafia world was dangerous, full of schemes, betrayals, and violence. Every day was a careful dance between maintaining authority and watching your back. She had earned her position through sharp mind, unshakable courage, and a determination that left no room for weakness. Yet even someone like her, who had survived threats and challenges most could never imagine, lived in a world filled with caution and unease. One morning, the head of the household staff knocked lightly on her bedroom door. "Madam, we have received the resume of the new maid." "She will start tomorrow," he said, his voice steady but careful. He had worked for her for many years and had long learned to speak only when necessary. The woman turned her gaze from the window to him, her eyes cold but attentive. "Bring her in. I want to see if she's capable," she replied simply. There was no hint of excitement, curiosity, or doubt in her tone. It was an order. The staff member nodded and left, his footsteps fading into the polished hallways. She turned back to the window, looking out at the city below. Even from this height, she could see the pulse of life, the chaos, the constant rush of people. Some feared her. Some simply didn't know she existed. Most didn't understand the weight of the power she carried, and that was exactly how she liked it. The new maid, by contrast, had no idea what awaited her. She had traveled a long distance, carrying only a small bag of belongings, her heart filled with both nervousness and determination. She had heard rumors about the woman she was going to serve, of course. Everyone had. The city itself seemed to whisper about her fiancé's reputation. But she was not the type to be easily intimidated. She had faced difficulties before, and she had learned that courage often meant standing still while the world tried to push you over. The next day, she arrived at the mansion. The gates opened with a quiet hiss, and the long driveway seemed endless under the soft morning light. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The building loomed above her, as grand and intimidating as she had imagined. The staff met her at the door, their eyes quickly assessing, judging, wondering if she would be able to survive here. She greeted them politely, her voice calm and confident, and she immediately noticed the tension in the air. This was not a normal household. Everything about it spoke of rules, discipline, and danger hidden beneath the polished surfaces. She was shown around the mansion, introduced to the staff, and given a brief tour of her responsibilities. She listened carefully, asked relevant questions, and never once faltered in her composure. The staff exchanged glances. She was different. They could sense it, though they weren't sure if it was for better or worse. The woman they feared most in the world was about to meet someone new, someone who might shake the careful order they had all lived under. Later that afternoon, the fiancée made her first appearance to meet the new maid. She entered the room with her usual calm but powerful presence. The maid stood at attention, straight-backed and poised as if she understood the unspoken rules of this household already. There was a moment of silence as the two women regarded each other. The fiancée's eyes were sharp, piercing, and unrelenting. She didn't smile. She didn't speak immediately. She simply studied the maid, measuring her, weighing her worth in a few silent seconds. The maid held her gaze, unflinching. She could feel the intensity, the power, but she did not let it shake her. "I am ready to serve and do my best," she said clearly. There was no fear in her voice, only sincerity and determination. The fiancée nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly against the floor. It was not praise, but it was acknowledgement. Days passed, and the maid began her duties. She worked quietly, efficiently, and carefully. She observed the routines of the household, learned the preferences of the fiancé, and navigated the subtle politics among the staff. She did not try to stand out unnecessarily, but she also did not hide from challenges. When a small crisis arose, a broken vase, a misplaced document, a misunderstanding among the staff, she handled it calmly, often resolving issues before anyone else could even react. The fiancé noticed this, though she said nothing. The staff noticed it too, but they kept their opinions to themselves. In this house, speaking out of turn could be dangerous. One evening, the fiancé called the maid into her study. The room was dimly lit, the walls lined with books and artifacts, a testament to both wealth and intelligence. She motioned for the maid to sit, her expression unreadable. "You're different from the others," she said quietly. There was no anger, no threat, just a statement. "You do not fear me in the same way, yet you are not careless. Why?" The maid met her gaze and replied calmly, "Fear is easy. Respect is earned. I hope to earn yours by my actions, not by trembling at your presence." Her words were simple, yet they carried weight. The fiancé studied her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. It was not agreement, not approval, but it was recognition. In a world where so few dared to speak with honesty, this maid had already shown courage. From that moment, something subtle began to change. The fiancé's eyes lingered a fraction longer when watching the maid work. She noticed the careful attention, the calm demeanor, and the quiet intelligence. There was no sudden warmth, no overt smiles, no easy friendship. But the atmosphere in the mansion shifted imperceptibly. Staff who had once whispered nervously now watched quietly, sensing that this new maid might be different, might withstand the gaze of the fiancé without faltering. The first part of their story had begun. It was a slow, careful dance of observation, of understanding, of silent challenges. The fiancé remained a figure of fear to the world, but inside the walls of her mansion, something new was starting to grow. A spark of curiosity, the first signs of change, and the quiet beginning of an unexpected bond. The maid did not yet know the full scope of the fiancé's world, the dangers that lurked outside, or the true depth of her influence. But she had taken the first step, and in doing so, she had begun to unravel the tightly woven threads of fear, control, and power that surrounded the woman everyone else feared. By the end of the week, the mansion had settled into a rhythm that included the maid. She moved with confidence, worked with precision, and navigated the complex dynamics of the household. The fiancé continued to watch her closely, still cold, still distant, but with eyes that no longer looked at the maid solely as another subordinate. She began to wonder silently what this maid could bring to her life, and whether anyone else had ever dared to stand before her without fear. The story of fear, power, and control had a new character now, and the first act of transformation was quietly, steadily unfolding. The maid's second week in the mansion began quietly, but her presence had already stirred small ripples in the household. Staff members who had once moved through the halls with precise, almost robotic caution now glanced at her with curiosity. They could sense a subtle shift in the atmosphere, something they had never experienced before. The fiancé remained cold and commanding, but there was an edge of interest that could not be ignored. It started with small gestures. The maid noticed the fiancé's preference for certain tea leaves, the precise way she liked her documents organized, the subtle patterns of her daily routine. She adapted quickly, learning not just the surface tasks, but the unspoken expectations that guided the mansion. She did not draw attention to herself unnecessarily, but she also did not shy away when challenges appeared. When a guest arrived unexpectedly one afternoon, she handled the situation with quiet authority, ensuring that the fiancé's instructions were followed flawlessly, yet without the panic that others might have shown. The fiancé observed all of this from her study window. She had always been able to spot potential threats, weaknesses, and strengths in the people around her within moments of meeting them. Most bowed to her presence or tried to avoid her gaze, but the maid was different. She moved through the house with grace, confidence, and a quiet determination. She did not seek approval, yet she did not provoke. It was a delicate balance, and the fiancé recognized it immediately. Rumors of the fiancé's feared reputation had reached the maid long before she arrived, and she had come prepared to face intimidation with poise. But the reality of living under the same roof was more intense than any story could convey. The mansion seemed alive, each corridor filled with echoes of past authority, each object a silent reminder of power and control. Despite this, the maid remained undaunted. She knew that surviving here meant observing, learning, and acting without hesitation. One evening, as she was arranging the fiancé's study, a minor incident occurred that tested her resolve. A valuable artifact, left carelessly by one of the visiting associates, slipped from its stand and teetered dangerously. Without thinking, she caught it just before it fell, setting it down carefully. She could feel the tension in the room, imagining the fiancé's reaction. When the fiancé entered, she expected anger or rebuke, but instead, there was a moment of silence. The fiancé's gaze lingered on the maid, not with hostility, but with acknowledgement. "Attention to detail matters," the fiancé said finally, her tone neutral. "Not many people notice what should be noticed until it is too late." The maid nodded. "I believe even small things can make a difference. I try to handle them before they become problems." The fiancé's lips pressed into a thin line, and she turned away. But the moment carried a subtle weight. Recognition, even quiet, was rare in this household. The maid's confidence and skill were slowly earning it, and the fiancé took note. As the days passed, the maid began to understand the rhythms of the mansion and the layers of control the fiancé maintained. There were security measures, formal protocols, and unspoken rules that governed interactions, not just with staff, but with visitors and associates from outside the house. She navigated these carefully, earning small, unspoken trust as she handled tasks with intelligence and discretion. Each success added to her quiet reputation among the staff, who began to look at her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. They whispered about her bravery in hushed tones, careful not to attract attention, yet unable to ignore the growing influence she seemed to have. One afternoon, a delivery arrived that brought an unexpected challenge. A package intended for the fiancé had been mistakenly left at the staff entrance, creating a risk of exposure to outsiders. The maid noticed immediately and took control of the situation, securing the package and reporting the incident with calm efficiency. It was a small moment, but it demonstrated her quick thinking and her ability to act decisively under pressure. The fiancé watched this from a distance, impressed by the maid's ability to handle situations that could easily have caused problems. The fiancé decided to test the maid further, setting up subtle challenges that required judgment, patience, and loyalty. She would leave instructions with small gaps, requiring the maid to think carefully and act correctly without explicit guidance. Each time, the maid passed with quiet skill, her actions thoughtful and precise. The fiancé's observation of her grew more focused. She had never encountered someone so capable and composed in the midst of her demanding environment. During a rare moment alone, the maid reflected on the dynamics of the mansion. She could feel the weight of the fiancé's world pressing in, yet she was determined to navigate it with integrity and intelligence. She understood that fear ruled many here, but she believed that respect and competence could be just as powerful. Each day she worked, she not only learned the routines and preferences of the fiancé, but also gained a deeper understanding of the subtleties of power and trust that governed the household. The fiancée, meanwhile, found herself observing the maid in moments of quiet reflection. She noticed the way she moved, the way she anticipated problems before they arose, the calm way she spoke and acted even when situations became tense. It was different from the usual obedience she commanded from others. There was no flattery, no fear-driven compliance, only competence, intelligence, and a quiet strength that intrigued her. For the first time, she felt a curiosity she had long suppressed, wondering what motivated this woman, what shaped her character, and how far her influence might reach. The maid's interactions with the staff also revealed her natural leadership. Without seeking it, she inspired cooperation, patience, and diligence. Staff members who had previously feared the fiancé, strictness, now felt a measure of confidence when working alongside the maid. Her presence encouraged them to act carefully yet confidently, knowing that mistakes could be mitigated by careful thought and teamwork. Even the most cautious among them began to hope that the new maid might bring balance to the tense household. One evening, during a quiet dinner, the fiancé unexpectedly spoke to the maid directly. The tone was still formal, almost cautious, but the words carried weight. "You are different from the others. You do not fear me, yet you do not disregard caution. Explain why." The maid met her gaze steadily. "I have learned that fear can only control for a short time. Understanding, careful observation, and integrity can create trust. I hope to earn your trust by my actions, not by trembling at your presence." The fiancé was silent for a moment, considering the answer. It was precise, honest, and insightful. She nodded once, and though the gesture was subtle, it carried significance. In a world where loyalty was often bought or demanded, this maid had offered a rare honesty and a willingness to act with integrity. As the second week drew to a close, the fiancé began to include the maid in tasks that required judgment and discretion. There were small errands, meetings with staff, and minor decisions that allowed the maid to exercise her intelligence and observation. Each time she proved herself capable, reinforcing the quiet respect that was slowly growing between her and the fiancé. The mansion, once an unyielding realm of fear and precision, was beginning to adapt to her presence. Staff members noticed the subtle changes. They whispered about the fiancé's growing tolerance, even subtle admiration for the maid. Some were skeptical, worried that this would bring complications. Others quietly hoped that the new dynamic might make the household less tense, more balanced, and easier to navigate. The maid, however, remained focused on her duties, unaware of the full extent of her influence, yet fully committed to her role. By the end of the second week, the fiancé's icy demeanor had begun to soften, ever so slightly, around the maid. She had not changed fundamentally. She was still commanding, still precise, still feared by the world. But within the walls of her mansion, a small but meaningful transformation was taking place. The maid's presence, her intelligence, and her courage were quietly reshaping the patterns of the household. The staff moved with a new sense of calm, and the fiancée herself found moments of reflection and curiosity that had long been absent. The relationship between the two women was evolving slowly, like a careful chess game. Each move was deliberate, measured, and significant. Trust was not given freely in this household, yet the maid was beginning to earn it, piece by piece. The fiancé, once an untouchable figure of fear, was beginning to see the value of competence, courage, and quiet strength in someone other than herself. The second part of the story closed with a sense of anticipation. The mansion, filled with shadows, whispers, and power, was now home to a new dynamic. The maid had begun to prove her worth, not through fear, but through integrity, intelligence, and calm courage. The fiancé had started to notice, observe, and consider. A subtle transformation was underway, setting the stage for challenges, discoveries, and bonds that would shape the days to come. The mansion had settled into a rhythm, but it was a fragile balance. The fiancé remained a figure of authority, her presence commanding respect and sometimes fear. Yet the maid's quiet strength and competence had begun to leave a subtle mark. It was noticeable not only to the fiancé, but also to the staff, who had long served in tense silence, fearing even the smallest mistake. The maid moved with precision, her eyes always alert, her actions deliberate yet graceful, as if she had been born to navigate the mansion's complex world. One morning, a crisis arose that would test the maid in ways she had not anticipated. A visiting associate, known for his arrogance and lack of respect for the household rules, arrived unexpectedly. He carried himself with the assumption that no one here could challenge him. The staff stiffened, unsure how to respond, and the fiancé's eyes narrowed, a subtle but unmistakable warning. She had her own plans for dealing with him, but the maid sensed the tension instantly and stepped forward without hesitation. With calm authority, she greeted the visitor, guiding him politely yet firmly through the protocols he had ignored. She noticed the little things, the way he fidgeted when he realized he was being observed, the subtle cues of his discomfort, and the growing respect in his eyes as she continued to lead him with quiet confidence. The fiancé watched silently from her study, a small hint of intrigue in her gaze. This maid was not just capable, she was unshakable, even in the presence of someone who could have intimidated many. After the guest left, the fiancé called the maid to her private study. The room, dimly lit, carried an aura of quiet power. The fiancé's eyes were sharp, assessing and calculating. "You handled that well," she said, her tone still formal but with an edge of approval. "Most would have faltered or shown fear. How did you maintain control?" The maid answered calmly, "I focused on the situation, not the person. Fear only distracts. Understanding and patience guide action." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. The fiancé's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned away, leaving the moment to hang in the air. It was not praise in the traditional sense, but in this household, acknowledgement was rarer and more meaningful. The maid's confidence began to influence the other staff as well. They started to observe her interactions and noticed the way she handled challenges with intelligence and composure. It was a subtle inspiration, not a command, but they found themselves learning from her example. The tension that had once dominated the mansion softened slightly, replaced by a cautious optimism that even small victories could make a difference. One afternoon, a delicate situation arose, involving the fiancé's personal documents. A mistake in the filing system had caused a potential breach, one that could have had serious consequences. The maid noticed it immediately, corrected the error without alarm, and reported the resolution with clarity and precision. The fiancé, observing from a distance, felt a rare sense of relief. Here was someone who could handle responsibility without fear or hesitation, someone who understood the gravity of the situation and acted accordingly. The fiancé's interest in the maid grew. She began to observe more closely, noting the maid's attention to detail, her calm demeanor under pressure, and the way she navigated the unspoken rules of the household. It was unusual for the fiancé to feel curiosity about anyone in this way. Most people either feared her or sought her favor, but this maid had neither of these traits in abundance. She had respect and competence, and the fiancé could not ignore it. The maid, too, noticed subtle changes. The fiancé's eyes lingered on her slightly longer during their interactions. Her instructions carried a tone that suggested she was testing not just obedience, but intelligence. The dynamics of their relationship were evolving, not through overt displays of emotion, but through small, meaningful exchanges that built a foundation of trust and mutual understanding. The turning point came when a minor fire broke out in the kitchen. A careless mistake by one of the staff caused a pan to catch flame. Panic began to spread, but the maid acted swiftly, guiding everyone to safety, containing the fire, and calling for assistance with calm authority. The fiancé arrived just as the situation was under control, observing the maid's composed handling of the crisis. She said nothing, but the respect in her eyes was unmistakable. Here was someone who could face danger without hesitation, someone whose presence brought stability rather than chaos. After the incident, the staff looked at the maid differently. They whispered among themselves, marveling at her courage and ability to act under pressure. The fiancé, observing this silent admiration, felt a rare sense of satisfaction. The The maid had earned respect not through fear, as many did in this household, but through competence, intelligence, and calm courage. It was a different kind of power, one that complemented the fiancé's own strength and authority. The maid also began to notice the fiancé's moments of vulnerability, rare glimpses of doubt or reflection, subtle pauses when she considered decisions, and a quiet curiosity about the world outside the mansion. These moments were fleeting, almost imperceptible, but they revealed a side of the fiancé that few had ever seen. The maid did not exploit these vulnerabilities, but she observed them with empathy, understanding that even the most powerful people carried hidden depths and unspoken fears. Their interactions began to include small conversations that were not strictly about tasks or duties. The fiancé asked questions, not out of idle curiosity, but to test understanding and judgment. The maid responded with honesty and insight, her words measured and thoughtful. Each exchange strengthened the unspoken bond between them, a connection built on trust, respect, and the recognition of each other's strengths. As days turned into weeks, the fiancé began to rely on the maid for matters that required discretion and intelligence. She sought advice in subtle ways, observed her reactions to complex situations, and occasionally allowed the maid to make decisions within her domain. It was a slow and careful process, but the foundation of trust was growing stronger with each passing day. The staff, too, adapted to this new dynamic. They followed the maid's example, learning to act with careful judgment and thoughtful consideration rather than fear-driven obedience. The mansion, once dominated by tension and strict hierarchy, was beginning to operate with a new balance. The maid's influence was subtle yet undeniable, and it extended beyond her immediate duties to touch every corner of the household. One evening, the fiancé called the maid to her study again. The room was quiet, illuminated by a single lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. "You are proving to be invaluable," the fiancé said, her tone formal but slightly softened. "Not because of obedience, but because of your understanding and composure. Few people possess these qualities." The maid bowed her head respectfully. "I believe that every task, no matter how small, deserves attention and care. I try to act with integrity in all that I do." Her answer was simple, but it conveyed a depth of character that the fiancé recognized. It was rare to encounter someone whose actions matched their words so consistently. By the end of this third part of their journey, the mansion had changed in subtle but significant ways. The maid had begun to earn the trust and respect of both the fiancé and the staff. The fiancé's icy exterior remained, but it was tempered by curiosity, observation, and an emerging recognition of the maid's value. The relationship between them had evolved beyond simple authority and obedience. It had become a careful, growing bond built on competence, integrity, and quiet courage. The story of fear and authority in the mansion was shifting. The maid had proven that strength was not only about power and intimidation, but also about intelligence, calmness, and reliability. The fiancé, long accustomed to control through fear, was beginning to see the potential of partnership and trust. Together, they were forging a new dynamic, one that promised challenges, growth, and unexpected connections in the days to come. The stage was set for transformations that neither had fully anticipated, but both would come to shape in ways that would leave a lasting impact on the household and each other. Life in the mansion had grown more predictable, but the air still carried tension. The fiancé remained a figure of power, respected and feared, while the maid's presence had quietly shifted the household's atmosphere. Staff moved with a balance of caution and confidence, inspired by the maid's calm and capable demeanor. The fiancé watched closely, noting how the maid navigated every situation with precision, intelligence, and courage. She had begun to rely on her in ways she had never relied on anyone before. One morning, a letter arrived at the mansion, its contents subtle yet threatening. It was from a rival group, a subtle warning meant to remind the fiancé that the world outside her carefully maintained walls was dangerous. The staff quickly noticed the tension, unsure how to respond, while the fiancé read the letter with her usual calm but calculating eyes. She set it aside, but the implications were clear. Challenges were coming, and the fiancé needed allies she could trust. The maid, noticing the slight shift in the fiancé's demeanor, approached carefully. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked quietly. There was no fear in her tone, only concern and readiness to act. The fiancé considered this for a moment, then nodded. It was rare for her to ask for assistance, and even rarer to acknowledge it, but this small gesture signaled trust. The maid understood that her role had evolved beyond household duties. She was now a confidant and a source of support in a delicate situation. The days that followed tested both women. A group of outsiders arrived at the mansion under the guise of routine business, but their intentions were unclear. The fiancé's instincts told her that there was danger, and she watched the maid closely, assessing her reactions. The maid, aware of the subtle signs, remained calm and observant, noticing discrepancies in behavior and speech that others overlooked. She quietly gathered information, prepared contingencies, and ensured that the staff were aware of their roles without spreading panic. One afternoon, as a tense meeting unfolded in the mansion's study, a heated exchange began between the visitors and the fiancée's representatives. The atmosphere thickened, and it was clear that the situation could escalate at any moment. The maid stepped forward, calmly clarifying points, redirecting conversations, and preventing misunderstandings. Her interventions were subtle but effective, allowing the fiancé to maintain authority while defusing potential conflict. It was a delicate balance, and her skill in navigating it impressed the fiancé more than she let on. After the visitors left, the fiancé summoned the maid to her private room. "Your judgment is sharper than I anticipated," she said, her tone carrying the rare hint of admiration. "You act without fear, yet your decisions are thoughtful and precise. Explain how you remain so composed." The maid met her gaze steadily. "I focus on what can be controlled and prepare for what cannot. Fear clouds judgment, but careful observation and understanding guide action." Her answer was simple, but it resonated with the fiancé's own principles. The fiancé nodded, a subtle acknowledgement of respect. She had long relied on intimidation to maintain control, but the maid's approach offered something different: calm authority, intelligence, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. The fiancé realized that strength was not just about power, but about reliability and competence, and she began to see the maid not as a subordinate, but as an essential ally. Meanwhile, the staff noticed the evolving dynamic. The fiancé's attention to the maid had become more frequent, her expression softer, and her instructions more nuanced. The household operated with a sense of cautious optimism. The maid's presence brought stability and confidence, allowing everyone to perform their roles with greater assurance. Even those who had long feared the fiancé began to notice the subtle changes, recognizing that respect, rather than fear, was influencing the new balance of power. The maid's influence extended beyond practical matters. She also offered emotional support, understanding the pressures and isolation that came with the fiancé's position. Though the fiancé rarely admitted vulnerability, the maid's quiet presence allowed her moments of reflection without judgment. It was a rare form of companionship, one built on trust, discretion, and shared understanding rather than frivolous conversation or flattery. A critical moment arrived when a security breach occurred. An outsider had attempted to gain unauthorized access to sensitive information. The fiancé's instincts were sharp, but the situation required immediate, precise action. The maid quickly identified the breach, coordinated with the security team, and ensured that the fiancé's interests remained protected. Her composure and efficiency prevented potential disaster. The fiancé, observing the resolution, felt a rare sense of relief and acknowledgement. The maid's presence had become indispensable. Following the incident, the fiancé began to include the maid in decisions that had previously been made alone. Meetings, security checks, and strategic planning now included the maid's input, a clear sign of trust and reliance. The maid's insights were valued, not just for their practicality, but for the clarity and calm judgment she brought to every situation. The fiancé, who had long trusted few, was now learning to depend on someone in a way she had never done before. Despite the growing bond, challenges remained. Rival factions continued to test boundaries, and the fiancé's reputation demanded vigilance at all times. Yet the maid's steady presence provided a foundation of confidence. Together, they navigated these obstacles with careful planning, precise action, and unspoken coordination. The fiancé had come to recognize that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act wisely despite it, and the maid embodied this principle. The staff continued to adapt to the evolving dynamic. They watched and learned from the maid's example, gaining confidence and composure in their roles. The mansion, once a realm dominated by fear, had begun to transform into a place of careful cooperation, guided by competence and intelligence rather than intimidation alone. The fiancé's leadership remained strong, but it was now tempered by trust and respect, qualities that had long been absent in the household. One quiet evening, the fiancé observed the maid organizing a complex schedule of tasks, interactions, and contingencies. She moved with quiet efficiency, anticipating needs before they arose and acting without hesitation. The fiancé felt a deep respect, a recognition that this woman had earned a place beside her not through fear, flattery, or submission, but through integrity, intelligence, and unwavering composure. It was a rare and valuable quality, one that the fiancé had long sought but rarely found. The relationship between the two women had evolved into something beyond hierarchy. There was trust, respect, and a growing reliance on each other's abilities. The fiancé, who had always commanded obedience, was now learning the value of partnership. The maid, who had arrived as an outsider, had proven herself capable, not just in practical matters, but in navigating the complexities of power, trust, and human relationships. By the end of this fourth part, the mansion was no longer just a place of control and fear. It had become a space where competence, courage, and careful judgment guided actions, and where trust and respect began to shape relationships. The maid had earned a place of influence, and the fiancé had learned the rare lesson that relying on someone else did not weaken her power. It strengthened it. Together, they faced the challenges ahead with clarity, composure, and a growing sense of mutual respect, setting the stage for transformations that would affect not only the household, but their lives in ways neither could fully anticipate. The mansion had changed in ways that no one outside could have anticipated. The fiancée, once feared by everyone in her world, had begun to show signs of transformation. Her icy demeanor softened, not in a way that reduced her authority, but in a way that revealed strength through trust and understanding. The maid, who had entered the household weeks earlier as an outsider, had quietly earned a place beside her, not through fear or flattery, but through intelligence, courage, and unwavering composure. It started with small acts. The maid continued to manage her duties with precision, anticipating needs and preventing problems before they arose. She was always calm, never rushing, never panicking, even when challenges appeared without warning. The staff looked to her for guidance, and even the fiancé began to consult her on decisions that had previously been made alone. Their relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect and quiet partnership. One day, the fiancé received word of a serious threat from a rival group. It was a subtle warning, hinting at disruption and danger, the kind that required careful handling and strategic planning. The fiancée, accustomed to managing threats with a combination of intimidation and control, found herself relying on the maid's perspective for the first time. The maid assessed the situation calmly, pointing out potential risks and offering clear, measured solutions. Her insights were practical, but also guided by a deep understanding of human behavior and the dynamics of trust and loyalty. Together, they prepared for the challenge. The fiancé's usual staff followed their lead, moving with a newfound confidence inspired by the maid's composure and intelligence. The mansion, once tense and silent, now buzzed with quiet, focused energy. Each person knew their role, and the atmosphere was one of careful cooperation rather than fear. It was a shift that reflected not just the maid's influence, but also the fiancé's willingness to embrace guidance and trust. When the rivals attempted to disrupt the household, they found a well-organized and prepared defense. The maid anticipated their moves, adjusted plans on the fly, and coordinated responses with precision. The fiancé, usually the sole force of authority, found a rare sense of relief as the situation unfolded smoothly. The crisis was handled efficiently, with minimal disruption, and the rivals left with no success. It was a testament to the power of trust, preparation, and collaboration. Afterward, the fiancé called the maid to her private study. The room, dimly lit, carried the usual aura of authority, but the atmosphere between them was different now. The fiancé's eyes, once cold and unyielding, held a hint of warmth and appreciation. "You have proven yourself beyond expectation," she said quietly. "Not just in action, but in understanding, judgment, and calmness under pressure. Few could have handled this with such precision." The maid bowed slightly. "I only did what needed to be done. Strength is not just about authority, but about preparation, patience, and understanding. I wanted to help in the best way I could." Her words were simple, yet they resonated deeply with the fiancé, who understood the truth in them. It was rare to find someone who could act decisively without seeking recognition, someone who embodied strength through integrity. Over the next few days, the fiancé continued to include the maid in critical decisions. Meetings, plans, and even discussions with external associates were now conducted with her input. The household operated with remarkable efficiency, the staff more confident and composed than ever. The fiancé had learned the value of partnership, and the maid had proven the power of intelligence, courage, and empathy in navigating both human relationships and high-stakes situations. Beyond practical matters, the fiancé began to reveal moments of vulnerability. Rare glimpses of reflection, quiet pauses, and subtle admissions of doubt showed that even someone so powerful had fears and uncertainties. The maid offered quiet support, not through words of comfort, but through her presence, competence, and understanding. The fiancé felt a rare connection, one based on trust rather than obligation, and it deepened their bond. The staff noticed the changes in their leader as well. The fiancé's authority remained strong, but her interactions were more measured, her instructions more thoughtful, and her presence less intimidating. She was still feared by the world outside, but inside the mansion she had learned that strength could coexist with trust and respect. The maid's influence had not diminished her power. It had strengthened it, creating a balance that had been missing for years. A few weeks later, a celebration was held within the mansion, a rare event that marked a milestone in both the fiancé's leadership and the household's cohesion. Staff, associates, and close confidants gathered, and the atmosphere was one of admiration, respect, and cautious optimism. The fiancée observed quietly, her eyes occasionally meeting the maid's. There was no need for words. The bond between them was clear in gestures, glances, and unspoken understanding. During the celebration, a small incident occurred that could have caused embarrassment or disruption. The maid handled it gracefully, diffusing tension with calm efficiency and tactful communication. The fiancé, watching this unfold, felt a profound sense of appreciation. It was not just about competence, it was about judgment, integrity, and the ability to act with quiet courage when circumstances demanded it. By the end of the evening, the household had transformed. The fiancé's reputation as a feared figure remained intact externally, but internally, the mansion operated with a new balance. Respect, trust, and competence now guided interactions. The maid had earned the admiration of the staff, the respect of the fiancé, and the quiet loyalty of everyone who served within the household. Her presence had reshaped the dynamics of the mansion without undermining authority, proving that strength and empathy could coexist in the most challenging environments. In the days that followed, the fiancé continued to rely on the maid in increasingly important matters. Strategic decisions, personal confidences, and high-pressure situations were navigated together. The fiancé had learned that true power was not just about commanding fear, but about recognizing value, understanding judgment, and trusting those who had proven their worth. The maid, who had entered the household as an outsider, had become an indispensable presence, a guide, and a partner in both the practical and personal realms of the fiancé's world. The story of the fiancé and the maid concluded not with dramatic confrontation or sweeping changes, but with quiet transformation. The fiancé had evolved, learning the power of trust, collaboration, and respect. The maid had proven that courage, intelligence, and integrity could shape relationships and influence even the most guarded individuals. Together, they had created a household where strength was balanced by wisdom, authority was guided by understanding, and fear was replaced by respect. As the sun set over the mansion, the fiancé and the maid moved through the halls with a shared understanding. The world outside remained unpredictable and dangerous, but within these walls, a partnership had been forged. It was a bond that promised resilience, insight, and strength in the days to come. The fiancé, once feared by everyone, now faced the world with a rare sense of confidence and trust, knowing that the maid had changed not just the household, but her life. The story ended with the quiet power of human connection, proving that courage, empathy, and understanding could overcome even the deepest fear, leaving a legacy that would endure within the mansion and beyond.